Let's look this evening in Nehemiah in chapter 6. And we'll look a little bit at what we talked about last week. This clicker will work here. Of course, we look at from outward threats to inward troubles, things that were taking place within, even when, again, things were happening, things were going and progressing well in rebuilding the wall. It did not, eventually still, you're going to have issues and problems, and if it's not from outside, then you have problems that end up happening within. And we looked at this as well. We talked about the cry of the people and the oppression that was taking place, and that those within the land there who were of the heritage, lineage, they themselves were oppressing their own people, and they were ended up having them indentured servitudes as slaves. The cry of the people was over economic corruption. We looked at that, over enslavement of their families. And then we talked about the courage of Nehemiah as well. What did he do in the midst of this? He rebuked the rulers, he exposed their evil, and he demanded their dedication in this. He couldn't believe what was going on, and how all that time he told them, he said, the reality that we had been enslaved before and that we were in captivity by the Babylonians, and yet we are going that route, and instead of just seeking to rebuild and help one another, again, then they were basically just trying to get money and trying to gain wealth. And so he exposed them in this, he rebuked them. And then we look at the commitment of Nehemiah as well. We talked about here that his position, Nehemiah was a man of integrity. He would not allow the position that he was in, because again, these rulers, these wealthy individuals, they listened and they followed Nehemiah. Now, he could have came in and he could have had this amazing personality that everybody would follow, and then take that and use it to his own advantage. But that's not what he was going to do. He was seeking ultimately to do the work that God had called him to do, and that was to repair the walls, but also in this to have it to where Israel would be a light to the nations. Okay, and so we talked about this as well. So he would not allow his powerful position to destroy his purity in life. He would not allow it to deter his purpose. And his purpose was shining the light of the Lord, the Israelites being a testimony to the nations, and then also that they would themselves not be a laughingstock of the nations. But then also it would not allow him to diminish his prayers. If anything else, what we see is as Nehemiah is going on in the work, is that his prayer life is thriving. He is continually praying. Mark down the times you see when Nehemiah prays, when he is talking to God, when he's praying to God. So again, this is something as well that took place. Then we notice here in Nehemiah in chapter 6. Nehemiah in chapter 6, because again, the work is going on. But the devil's not going to allow, the devil is going to try his best to use different ones as tools to hinder the work, to destroy the work if need be. So what we see is there was a conspiracy against Nehemiah at this time. And so what we notice here is an attempted breach, but also a steadfast boldness in this. And we'll see as we go on in Nehemiah in chapter 6 and verse 1. Now, again, people were not laughing now. We notice at the beginning when they found out Nehemiah went there and actually checked the walls, checked everything in Jerusalem, and then made his purpose known, that Sanballat and Tobiah began to laugh and mock. And of course, Sanballat would be a ruler, very wealthy, but also it's believed that Tobiah was probably a servant of Sanballat, but then also married in later. But again, these are ones that they made fun of the work. But now they're not laughing. Now they see that it's going on further, and it's actually seeming to get close to be accomplished. So they've got to do as much as they can in their own power to stop the work from progressing. So in chapter 6 and verse 1 it says, "Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall, and that there were no breaks left in it." So now, again, they have this, the walls have been built. They have this protection now. And he says there's no gaps, yet, though at that time I had not hung the doors in the gates. That Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono." But they thought to do me harm. Now, years ago, when I read this. Even as a kid, or a teenager, reading this, I thought, well, it was good. If you're trying to get somebody to meet you in Ono, then you just don't do that. But again, Nehemiah, here you have ones that are they doing this and being angry about it? No, they're trying to, in a way, woo him over and say, hey, we just want to talk. We want to, wow, this is amazing what you've done. I'm sure that they tried to flatter in some way. They didn't just simply say, hey, get over here and meet with us. But again, they're we want to celebrate what's going on. This is a joyous time. My goodness, we can't believe what has happened. And of course, Nehemiah would not do that. But again, we notice they sent the messenger, and it says here that Sanballat sent and said, come, let us meet together among the villages there. But he says, I knew that they thought to do me harm. So I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? Because this would take time. This wasn't him just walking to just a short distance and go meet. Again, though, they could have presented this in a way that it was almost like, well, people, they see what's going on. Just stop for a time. Let's just celebrate. And you just come here and you don't have to keep on. You've done so much as it is. Don't worry about it. You can get back to it later. But Nehemiah doesn't do that. And we see there's some things that we notice. There's three things here when we look at the deceitfulness of Sanballat, and you have it there. One, we see these peaceful appearances that's taken place. Again, they're saying, they sent continually, it says in verse 4, but they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them the same way, over and over. So, again, this is why I say, I don't think it was in the message they sent was basically in force and trying to say, well, you better get over here. But again, they're trying in a way to just flatter and say, look, we just want to meet you. We just want to talk. Just want to talk. But he knows their schemes. And they do this over and over. He doesn't listen. He answered them in the same manner. He said over and over, I have a great work going on. I cannot come down. Then Sanballat sent his servant to me as before the 5th time, with an open letter in his hand. 4 times. Now again, 3rd time is not always a charm. 4 times the note didn't work. So now the 5th time. The 5th time, they have to do something else. And they step up their game. And this is where you see phony accusations. Because notice what it says here. He brings this open letter in his hand. And he said, and in the letter was written this. It is reported among the nations. And Geshem says that you, so again, Geshem has a little bit of weight in that area, in that region. But again, Geshem says this as well. We've got other ones that state this. And the Jews plan to rebel. The Geshem says that you and the Jews plan to rebel. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall that you may be their king. Nehemiah, how could you? You're there, you're rebuilding the walls, you're going to make a name for yourself. You're going to end up going against the government that's okayed you to be there. These are the rumors that's going on. Now, why do they do this? This is to try to, to try to present these rumors and to try to have it spread across the lands, but also really to get Nehemiah concerned over this and wondering, no, I've got to make sure to let people know I've got to fight this. I've got to put an ad in the paper. Now, he wouldn't be able to do that, but again, the reality is that to get his mind off of the work. And so notice, and you also have appointed prophets in verse 7 to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem. So they have this here that they're trying to present that Nehemiah is doing this, and in the end, Nehemiah is going to procure individuals, these prophets, to step up and say, Nehemiah is the true king. He's the true ruler. He rebuilt these walls and he led us through this. So now let's just fight. Let's stand firm and let's defend our territory. But notice we go on, it says, they state that you will have prophets to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah. Now these matters will be reported to the king. Oh, Nehemiah, these rumors, they're going to be reported. You didn't come. You should have came and spoke to us. But you didn't listen. And now guess what we're going to do? We're going to go to the king. And we're going to tattletale on you. So come therefore and let us consult together. So now Nehemiah is biting his fingernails. He's nervous and, man, he just can't eat. And no, that's not the case. Nehemiah knows this is just another tactic. These phony accusations trying to trip him up. Now, by the way, all the time when you go in the New Testament, you read about it. The Pharisees and the scribes and things, what did they do? Over and over, they're trying to in some way ensnare Jesus. Trying in some way to find, somehow to get at him. They can't do it. Jesus responds in the perfect ways, and then he has questions for them. And then they sit there and they don't want to answer. So here Nehemiah knows what has taken place. But people do this. This happens. If it's not just simply, if it doesn't work with peaceful appearances and people trying to flatter you, and hey, can we just talk for a little bit? That's all we're going to do. And boy, we just want to celebrate you. Really, they're going to end up criticizing and demeaning and everything else. But if that doesn't work, then obviously there has to be threats. Well, we heard these rumors. We heard this about you. I remember one particular ministry that I was at. When I was there, the prior pastor, this ministry, they did yearly votes. Now, you're talking about a humbling experience when you have to walk out of the sanctuary, walk into an office, and sit there and wait till you are told you can come back and be the pastor for the next year. And I remember, though, that the one pastor in particular that used to be at the church, he had left really in anger. Now, that was a pervasive theme for the church, but he left really mad. And but he ended up later on, he had came back and he was there, and they voted him as Sunday school superintendent. Which again, I was glad to somebody to have the help. But I still remember that one deacon that came to my office, and he said, "Brother Josh, I really need to talk with you." And I said, "All right." And I'm thinking, here we go, here's something else, But he said, "I really got to talk with you. Listen, this is just terrible. I just can't believe it." He said, "I've been hearing these rumors, and brother so-and-so, who's now Sunday school superintendent, I think he wants your job next." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, he can have it." I said, "If he wants it that bad, that's fine." He said, "You're not bothered by it?" I said, "No, not in the slightest." I said, "Brother," I said, "Was this what you heard from himself, or is this from somebody else?" "Well, this is from somebody else, and this is..." I said, Don't worry about this. Don't worry about this. But again, we often live our lives this way. I heard so-and-so said, and we just, and we run and we hide and we cry and we whine, and then we go and we tell everybody else, and we go and speak to other people. And guess what? In the end, you find out that individual, after you've land blasted them, drug them through the mud and everything else, and, got people on your side, then you find out later that it wasn't at all what they were meaning. What do you do about it? Well, then we just sit there and we say, "Well, I just couldn't help it." Yeah, you could. Be quiet. Be quiet. Go to the person, speak to them. Again, this is why I don't like social media. Many times people use that to air out the grievances, and I'm thinking nobody cares. Nobody really does. And they just do that many times. But this is where, again, these phony accusations from Nehemiah, that were being laden on Nehemiah. For anybody else, really, many people, they would sit there and say, "Oh no, they're going to take this letter. They're going to tell them about the rumors. They're going to lock me up. They're going to throw me away. What do I do about it?" Nehemiah, he's not bothered by it. God is his defender. I've often had to remind myself in this. I've written it down many times. Let God fight your battles, not your tongue. Let God fight your battles, not your tongue. He can do a better job. Better job. So again, Nehemiah, we notice it says in verse 8, "Then I sent to him saying, 'No such things as you say are being done, but you invent them in your own heart.'" It's in your own wild imagination you're coming up with these things. I'm not going to listen one bit to what you're saying. "For they were all trying to make us afraid, saying their hands will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands." Wow. What did he pray? Prayed for strength. Paul said, "Be strong in the power of his might." Nehemiah knew where strength lies. Who has the source of strength? Who is the source of that strength? And Nehemiah prayed to God, and he said, "God, strengthen my hands." They want to harm me. They want to do it. They want to to have evil thoughts against me, but God, you strengthen my hands in the work. Now we notice verse 10. Afterward, I came to the house of Shemaiah. We don't know when, but they had to come up with something else now, because again, even if they presented these reports, and they probably tried to, but they may have been stopped. And then there may have been ones that say, well, wait a minute, where are these reports coming from? Well, so-and-so said it, and so-and-so said it, and they just didn't get anywhere with these rumors. But then they had to come up with another way. And the last thing we see here is personal associations. They found, now this individual here was a friend of Nehemiah. And what we notice, it says here, I came to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was a secret informer. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God. He was actually close to this individual. But they were bribed in this way to try to trick Nehemiah. And he says, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. And let us close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you, Nehemiah. Indeed, at night they will come to kill you. They will come to kill you. And I said, should such a man as I flee? Again, if it was anybody else, maybe they would have listened, because this person was close to Nehemiah. And they may have thought, well, my goodness, he must have heard something that I didn't, and I don't want to die. And again, the question here, it may have been that they would set an ambush against him, or that they would have shown, hey, Nehemiah is such a coward, look at him trying to hide when nothing's really happening. But he said, should such a man as I flee? So we notice here, Nehemiah, the testimony of Nehemiah. One is faithfulness. We saw that already when they tried to coax him into meeting with him over and over. What was his response? I have work to do. I have work to do. He doesn't stop the work. He is faithful in that. His faithfulness to the work, but also his faithfulness to prayer. He is praying, seeking the Lord. Because again, it is not simply about us doing these things. We have to have the strength of God. We have to have God's guidance and leading. But we see faithfulness in his life. We see perceptiveness. Nehemiah knew what was going on. Another word would be discernment. He's very discerning. He understood these things taking place. He said, I know what y'all are trying to do. And even at this point, when it seems like an individual who seemed to be trusted, he still is perceptive. He still has discernment. And he also says, should someone like me flee? Because the other thing that we see with the testimony of Nehemiah is boldness ultimately. He says, such as I who would go into the temple to save his life, I will not go in. Then I perceived that God had not sent him at all. So again, it's then that he realized, when he saw probably the expression that the individual had, when he said, I'm not going to go there. Because who knows how much money that he was being offered to do this. Who knows that whatever blackmail that was going to take place. But he says, I'm not going to go. And he says, I perceive that God had not sent him at all, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. I already mentioned it before. Nehemiah is not a politician, thank the Lord for that. Because the wall wouldn't have been built until like 4,000 years later. And he would have been taking bribes constantly. And he would have been demanding this and demanding that. And he would have, thank the Lord he wasn't a politician. And he would have fled. If he was a politician, he would have ran and fled and tucked tail and hid in that temple. But he wasn't. He's a man of God. And he wasn't afraid. He had boldness. He said, for this reason he was hired, in verse 13, that I should be afraid and act that way and sin, so that they might have cause for an evil report and they might reproach me. He knew what it was. More than likely to sit there and to land blast and then to point. And sometimes this happens, many times, not sometimes, many times this happens in government. There is a lot of blackmailing going on. And an individual will go and they will go for the right reasons. And and what happens is they get hammered hard. And people will sit there and something happens and they'll blackmail them. And then they can do very little. Nehemiah, he's transparent, but he's also, again, his life is ultimately lived in the fear of God. Nobody could really sit there and try to they wanted to do that, and they wanted to present an evil report, but it didn't take place. He says the reason he was hired, they tried to make it that I was afraid, that I was scared. My God, now we notice another prayer. Already in this chapter, 2 prayers. The first one praying for God to strengthen his hands, but now he says, my God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, according to these their works. And the prophetess Noadiah. We don't know what is taking place, but there are specific individuals that were trying to demean the work and to malign his character. He says, and the rest of the prophets who would have made me afraid. So the wall was finished in the 25th day of Elul, in 52 days. And it happened when all our enemies heard of it. Now notice this. When they all heard it, all the nations around us saw these things. They were very disheartened in their own eyes. For they perceived that this work was done by who? By our God. By our God. Not by Nehemiah. It can only be a work of the Lord. So that we see the last thing here, the completion of the wall. One, it is grief to the wicked. They are grieved, they are disheartened. The other is that we see its glory to the Lord. They don't want this to happen because they know. They heard before and they've known the stories of what God did through the Israelites. They don't like it. They heard about Egypt. They don't like it. They heard about David's exploits. They don't like it. They heard about what God did over and over for the children of Israel in the wilderness. They don't like it. And so what else can they do but malign and to sit there? And it's sad because we live in this day and age where everybody, they're just so careful not to offend, so careful to just try to walk the line, and toe the line and just go back and forth and straddle the fence. Nehemiah wasn't going to do that. And we see that when God works in this, and there are people that actually get involved and are unified in the work of the Lord, and we see when that work is accomplished, it brings glory to his name. The nation saw it, and they were bothered, but they also said, what are we going to do? Because this here, it revealed that it was by God. They perceived that this work was done by our God. That's really what I would love for Timbers Drive Church, is the people to see. Now, again, your hope is not that, the community's against you and people are angry and everything else with that. But again, anytime you're doing and seeking to follow the Lord and pressing on, the devil's going to seek to find ways, whether it is within the church body or on the outside, going to cause conflicts, something. But at the end of it all, the hope is that people can actually look at Timbers Drive Church and see and say, this is the Lord's work. This is the Lord's work. And so we notice in verse 17, also in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them. For many in Judah were pledged to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Ara, and his son Johanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. Also they reported his deeds before me, and reported my words to him. Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. They didn't stop. They kept on sending it. But again, Nehemiah's faith is in the Lord. He is not fearful. He is bold. He's perceptive in this. He's faithful in what he's doing. And so God is blessing the work. He's blessing the work. And again, when we see this here, ultimately, well, we just hopefully strive to pattern our lives. Ultimately, you pattern your life after Christ. But again, you learn in this the testimony of Nehemiah and seek to also be faithful, bold, and not to live by speculation, not to live in fear, but to just press on in the work of the Lord. Because ultimately it's for his glory. But let's pray.